How many of you have an heroic story of an ancestor or ancestors braving the difficulties of living in a land of oppression, only to find hope and promise by moving to America? One of the most famous, prolific, progressive rabbis of the contemporary era, Jacob Neusner, once wrote an article in the Washington Post declaring America the true promised land for the Jews today. My own family had a similar view, as my great-grandfather, Abraham Bloch, moved from Evia in contemporary Belarus to Cleveland, where he started a profitable cafeteria and integrated his family into the American way of life. This archetypal story of escape from oppression to freedom, proliferation, and success is central to the Jewish narrative. In this week's Torah portion, Ki Tavo, we read that it was baked into the ancient Israelite identity, and that they were required to report to the temple and repeat the following every year out loud in front of the priests. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to Adonai, the God of our ancestors, and Adonai heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. Adonai freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, bringing us from this place and giving us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The echo of this ancient formula shines through in my family's own story, and I'm sure in many of yours, whether you're Jewish or not. Leaving a land of oppression for a land of promise, a land of milk and honey, is precisely how I understood my family's relationship to America. As I've gotten older, and especially in more recent years, I've come to understand how my family's prosperity in this country has also relied upon the displacement and subjugation of other peoples, namely the Native Americans and Black Americans who were forcibly enslaved. But I'm still grateful for my family's ability to thrive here and to avoid the calamities that struck the distant family members who did not make it out of Eastern Europe. But I realize that this narrative, too, is one of a certain form of American Jew. Yet many do not feel similarly. And instead of seeing America as an opportunity for a new way of living, have remained separated and insulated from the promise America can offer. In this past Sunday's New York Times, a piece ran that laid bare one of the ways in which many of our Jewish siblings in New York have maintained this insularity. Hasidic yeshivot, the schools in which children of the various Hasidic sects are educated, have purposefully failed to educate their children in the fundamentals of English, math, science, and other humanities. In 2019, every child from these schools who took a state-mandated test in English or math failed, in spite of the schools having received $375 million in state educational funds that year. In these communities, part of the identity cultivated amongst the population is to still see themselves as needing to remain completely separated from their surrounding culture, due to a mistrust of the non-Jewish population and a sense of ongoing persecution. This is not without some truth, as most of the 34 anti-Semitic attacks that occurred in Brooklyn last year were, in fact, against Hasidic Jews. I do not think, though, that this merits a carte blanche for keeping children illiterate and unable to function in wider society as a form of protection or cultural preservation. I believe that the idea that providing secular education will somehow undermine the Hasidic way of life is overstated by those who hold power in the community as a way of maintaining said power, not as a way of maintaining continuity of their tradition. To be sure, an educated population is more likely to question and push back against fundamentalist belief structures. But that does not mean that all aspects of the culture and traditions will also be deserted. It simply means that the current hierarchical power structure may be less able to maintain their iron grip upon the population, which, in my view, is good for everyone. A step in the right direction was taken by our state government on Tuesday to begin enforcing minimum requirements for private schools with regard to secular education. But it is only a first step, and was one whose consequences are still unclear. We individually can help make change as well. As we begin our trek into the new year, I ask that you consider what you might be able to contribute to help our Jewish siblings. There are two organizations in particular doing wonderful work in this area. One, Footsteps, has many volunteer opportunities, as well as ongoing programs that help people raised in ultra-Orthodox communities attempting to build new lives outside of their birth communities. You can learn more about them at footstepsorg.org. Another is YAFED, Young Advocates for Fair Education, which has been one of the primary drivers behind the regulations passed this week. Their founder, Naftali Moser, grew up in these yeshivot and has devoted his adult life to making sure other children from his community do not have the same experiences that he had. For more information about them, go to yafed.org, YAFFED.org. Please take a moment to think about how you can help with this ongoing struggle in our extended community. All Jews from all places and all backgrounds are, according to our tradition, guarantors for each other. This is partially based on our shared history and story. We are, according to this week's portion, all descendants of those oppressed and immiserated in Egypt. Let us make sure that we never allow oppression or immiseration to be committed in the name of Torah, and instead teach our children well that misery can be fleeting and that they can pick their own dreams, that they, through those dreams, can build for themselves and others a land of milk and honey. Shabbat Shalom.